A few years ago during Carnival, a friend invited me to spend a few days at his family's country house, located in a district near Valenca, in the countryside of Rio de Janeiro. It was a time of festivities and joy, and I didn't hesitate to accept the invitation. The house was nestled in a peaceful area, surrounded by woods and hills, a place that looked as though it had been pulled straight from a postcard. That morning, we visited a waterfall called Quiriri. We spent the entire day there, laughing, swimming in the cold water and listening to the sounds of nature, until the night fell, bringing with it the promise of new adventures. Later we went to the center of the district, where the carnival blocks were lighting up the square. The streets were packed, filled with music and costumes. Among the crowd, I met a girl who caught my attention immediately. Alice, a young woman with blonde hair and mesmerizing blue eyes, was the very definition of enchanting beauty. When we began to talk, she seemed just as interested in me as I was in her. She asked about my life, where I was staying, and if I had a girlfriend. I answered everything eagerly, trying to impress her. When I mentioned I was staying at my friend's country house, she paused for a moment, furrowing her brow. She asked if that was the house with a large jackfruit tree right at the entrance. I found it curious and confirmed that yes, it was. That's when she said something that made the temperature around me drop. The neighbors have been talking about strange things happening there. You hear noises like something big and heavy moving around at night. The dogs go crazy, barking and attacking the air, but no one dares to check what it is. I smiled, thinking it was funny. As a guy from the city, I was used to brushing off these kinds of stories as rural legends. However, even while laughing, there was something in her voice that unsettled me. She seemed absolutely serious. To break the strange mood, I invited her for ice cream, and the evening carried on pleasantly. When the clock struck midnight, I took Alice home on my motorcycle. As we arrived at the country house, I found my friend with an unusual expression, almost as if he was expecting something. He locked the door behind me, retrieved a revolver hidden in his waistband, and stashed it in a drawer. I was surprised, but he seemed reluctant to explain why he was being so cautious. I decided not to press the matter and went to bed. The next day the routine repeated itself. Waterfall in the morning, rest in the afternoon, and a growing sense of anticipation as nightfall approached. I was eager to see Alice again. When night finally came, I went out to meet her. We enjoyed the carnival together, laughed at the costumes, and made the most of every moment. Around 1:30 in the morning, I took her home. On the way back to the country house, something started to unsettle me. The road, once beautiful and tranquil, now seemed oppressive. The darkness felt thicker, the silence deeper. I don't know why, but something inside me told me that night was not going to end the way I had expected. I'd never been particularly familiar with nature. In the city, my routine was surrounded by tall buildings, paved streets, and at best a few scattered trees. Yet that night, as I neared the country house, something about the environment felt different. The air was heavier, and a peculiar sound cut through the silence of the road. It was hard to distinguish exactly what it was, but it sounded like a mix of grunts and howls, something that immediately made me feel uncomfortable. Further ahead, I began to hear the sound of the dogs. They were barking incessantly, as if they were facing something that had them on high alert. I stopped the motorcycle, took off my helmet, and turned to understand what was happening. That's when I saw, about 20 meters away, a scene I will never forget. In the middle of the chaos, an animal was fighting the dogs. But it wasn't an ordinary animal. Covered in thick, dark fur, its silhouette seemed distorted, like something from a nightmare. The fur was thicker around the upper body, and its arms, or what seemed to be arms, were long and muscular. Its legs resembled those of a dog, but more robust, and I couldn't see a tail. Its teeth were large and gleamed in the moonlight, contrasting with its grotesque appearance. A chill ran down my spine. Without thinking twice, I ran toward the house's porch, hiding behind a thick pillar. The sound of the dogs grew fainter, but the creature, as if it had sensed my presence, stood up on two legs. That movement confirmed what my instincts already knew. This was not natural. It lifted its snout and inhaled the air forcefully, as if trying to locate me. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Before I could react, the creature began walking toward me. In a moment of pure panic, I ran to the door of the house and began banging on it desperately. My friend opened it on the third knock, his face marked by a mixture of fear and urgency. He had seen everything through the window but remained motionless, not wanting to attract the monster's attention. We rushed inside and locked the door, hiding behind the couch. Outside, the creature reached the entrance. It pressed its snout against the door, sniffing forcefully as if trying to catch our scent. Then it moved to the window, peeking inside. Through the space between the couch and the wall, I could see it moving back and forth, each step a reminder that we were at the mercy of something far beyond our understanding. My friend was armed, but his hands were shaking so much that I doubted he would hit the target if he had to shoot. For a long time we stayed there, motionless, trying to control our breathing so as not to draw attention. Finally, the sounds began to fade. The creature seemed to have given up, and the barking of the dogs grew fainter and fainter until it disappeared completely. When the sun finally rose, we stepped outside cautiously. On the porch, the scene was horrifying. Blood spread across the ground and 2 dead dogs. My friend, pale-faced, grabbed a bucket and began cleaning it all up, saying we needed to leave the place spotless before his family arrived. While we worked, he finally broke the silence. "I knew this could happen," he admitted. "That thing, it's a werewolf. I've heard stories and even saw it from a distance once, but I never wanted to tell you because I knew you wouldn't believe it. You'd think I was crazy." I stayed silent. There was nothing I could say in that moment. When we finished, I went to the room, packed my things, and left without looking back. I got on the motorcycle and drove off. I didn't say goodbye to Alice, and to this day, I wonder what she must have thought about my sudden departure. I learned a lesson that night. Never underestimate the warnings life gives you, no matter how absurd they may seem. In 1958, in the rural area of Lorena, Sao Paulo, my mother lived in a community where stories about strange creatures were common. There, a man I'll refer to as Chico, to protect his identity, experienced something that is still remembered with a shiver by the older locals. The region, which at the time was isolated and difficult to access, was marked by accounts of encounters with a terrifying creature that many believed to be a werewolf. Traveling to the city was complicated. With no public transportation or personal vehicles, those who needed to go to the town center would often walk or ride horseback. These journeys often lasted the entire day, forcing people to spend the night away from home before returning. That's exactly what happened with the husband of a relative of Chico's. He had to take care of something in the city, and worried about leaving his wife alone with their newborn baby, asked Chico to spend the night at their house to keep her company. Chico agreed to the request, and as dusk fell, he headed to the woman's house. Once night had fully settled in, she retreated to her bedroom with the baby, while Chico stayed in the living room. He felt uneasy, but tried to ignore the strange sensation that seemed to spread through the house. During the night, as he peered through the small living room window, Chico saw something that left him frozen in place. Beneath the shadow of a nearby pine tree stood a large, dark figure that appeared to be watching the house. Chico's heart raced. He knew the tales of the werewolf were frequent in the area, but seeing something so close filled him with real, palpable fear. Without thinking twice, he rushed to lock the doors and windows. However, when he returned to close the small window he had overlooked earlier, he realized it was too late. The creature was already inside the house. The animal moved through the rooms, sniffing as if searching for something. Overcome with terror, Chico grabbed the handle of a hoe within reach and tried to confront it. He struck several blows as the creature moved back and forth, knocking over furniture and looking for a way out. The noise echoed through the house, and Chico's strength seemed insufficient to stop the beast, which resisted even the hardest blows. Chico continued to battle the creature with every ounce of strength he had left. The animal seemed impervious, as though the blows it received didn't faze it. It moved frantically, getting closer and closer to the door where the woman and the newborn baby were hiding. Its behavior suggested it was drawn by the scent of the baby, as if that was the uncontrollable force pulling it forward. Even exhausted and feeling his energy wane, Chico did not relent. He struck fast, precise blows, leaving no room for the creature to advance any further. The sound of his attacks and the creature's grunts reverberated through the house, creating an almost unbearable tension. Still, the creature displayed brutal strength, resisting every strike. Just when it seemed that Chico would have no strength left to continue, the werewolf finally retreated. In a desperate leap, the creature escaped through the narrow window it had entered, vanishing into the darkness of the night. Chico fell to his knees, sweaty and gasping for breath. The silence that followed was almost deafening. He knew that if he hadn't acted, the outcome of that night could have been tragic for the woman and the child. As he caught his breath, he felt a mix of relief and terror. What would have happened if he hadn't been there? That attack, which he would never forget, served as a stark reminder of the constant danger lurking in that region. This was the account I heard, narrated with the emotion of someone who had lived through a true nightmare. My name is Carlos, I'm from Santa Catarina, but I currently live in Barra Mansa, Rio de Janeiro. What I'm about to share happened in 2002 in Santa Catarina. Every time I try to talk about it, my friends and family tell me it's an exaggeration or something I made up in my head. Even so, the memory of that day, the sounds and the eyes of that thing, still haunt me, stealing my sleep and bringing nightmares. At the time, I worked as a community health agent. My job was to visit families in the area I was assigned, but on that particular day, I was given the task of covering a rural region that was usually handled by another health unit. My boss, a very organized nurse, decided we would go together. With the car loaded with files, medications, and supplies, we set off down a dirt road. The day went as expected, making visits, listening to reports, and organizing the care. It was late afternoon, around 5:30, when we finished our work and started heading back. The sky was beginning to change. A storm was forming on the horizon, and soon the first drops began to fall. Within minutes, the rain turned into a torrential downpour. The mud on the road made our progress difficult. The car fought to keep going, but after a sharp jolt, it became completely stuck. We stopped in the middle of nowhere, no phone signal, and night was already closing in. The rain seemed endless, pounding on the windshield. Inside the car, we tried to stay warm and calm. The cold and the constant sound of the storm created a suffocating feeling. My boss tried to make small talk, but my mind was elsewhere, caught up in the stories I'd heard about the area. People said strange things happen around there, but I always laughed them off, until then. It was at that moment that he decided to get out of the car to assess the situation with the stuck vehicle. I stayed inside, hearing his footsteps in the mud and his muffled shouts through the rain. When he asked me to start the car and rev the engine, I noticed something strange in his voice. It wasn't just worry about the car. Something was wrong in the darkness. I was alone now, trying to keep my composure in the chaos of the situation. The rain still beat down relentlessly, and the sound of the wind slicing through the brush seemed to echo in my chest. I had the car's headlights on, and the light illuminated part of the thicket ahead. The fence was bent as if something had passed through, but there was no logic to what I was seeing. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or some animal moving around, but there was something off, an unnatural movement that made no sense. It was as if the night itself was filled with omens. Then, suddenly I saw the eyes. They were enormous, glowing in the darkness, larger than a horse's. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, and an overwhelming sense of terror gripped me. There was no explanation for it. One thing was certain, I was no longer alone. I froze, trembling, unable to look away or even breathe properly. I didn't know what it was, but something told me it could be far worse than I could ever imagine. The only reaction I had was to press the car horn with all my strength. The sound echoed through the night, and soon my boss came running back, asking what I had seen. I tried to speak, but he dismissed it, saying it was just an animal. He didn't believe me, but I knew what I had seen wasn't normal. Trying to remain calm, he grabbed the flashlight and umbrella, determined to take a look at the situation. The fear paralyzed me, but he seemed intent on braving that darkness. Even with the flashlight, we could barely see anything except shadows and the rain that seemed to grow even more intense. That's when he suggested we turn back. I felt relieved that he had said it. Just as we started to turn around, a man appeared riding a horse. I recognized him from a visit I'd made to his house while attending to his daughter. He was heading out to fetch the cows from the pasture and offered to help, saying he had a tractor and could pull the car out. He told us the road back to his house would take about 40 minutes, and that we'd just need to wait a bit while he went to get the tractor. The tension we had been feeling began to ease. Finally, I thought I could relax, look forward to getting home, taking a shower and resting. But little did I know, the worst was yet to come. About half an hour after the man left in search of the tractor, something made me look to the side. By the edge of a creek, about 10 meters away, I saw something strange. The creature was there in the darkness, its face twisted, resembling a dog, but something was horribly wrong. Its skin covered the upper part of its body, but its legs were bent, looking broken. The sight froze me, but then fear surged through me. The creature didn't seem to care about the distance, and with the thunder, everything grew even darker. My boss, now also terrified, turned on the car's high beams, and soon the creature appeared, charging toward us with a speed that seemed unnatural. The creature's eyes gleamed intensely, and the light from the headlights reflected off it, brushing the side of the car and breaking the side mirror. I felt my heart nearly leap out of my chest. Fear was consuming me from within. The creature was closing in with impossible speed, and I was paralyzed. When at last the sound of the tractor reached us, the creature retreated, and the man appeared at the end of the road, far from where we were. My boss, still visibly shaken, asked me not to tell anyone what had happened. He said we were healthcare professionals and our credibility was at stake. We couldn't let something like this tarnish our reputation. We were quickly rescued with the help of the tractor and managed to leave, relieved but with the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something we couldn't understand. I, who never liked to talk about what I saw that night, feel that somehow I need to tell it. I don't know if what happened there was a warning, a sign of something larger, but I hope that if anyone passes through that path, they're as lucky as we were. That fear, that feeling of being watched, is something I will never forget. Good night. This story I'm about to share with you happened to my father, Manuel Vieira. From this point on, I will tell it with his own words. It all took place in 1998, in Ibicuay, a municipality in Bahia. Back then, my father was self-employed, running a gas depot at the edge of the town. He worked there with 3 employees, Alex, Iraldo and Wrangel, and also with his little pit bull, a very brave dog. One day, a stranger showed up at the depot, claiming to be from the rural area. He asked for a gas canister on credit. My father, who didn't know this man and was afraid he wouldn't be paid, refused. But the man insisted, saying his family was starving and that he needed the help. The man seemed desperate, and my father, feeling a bit of compassion, thought about asking one of his employees, Iraldo, the oldest of the 3, who knew many people from the region, for advice. Iraldo didn't know the man either. That made my father feel a little more at ease, but still suspicious that the man was trying to scam him. So he explained that he couldn't sell the gas, since he had never seen this man around before. The man, visibly irritated, looked at my father with eyes full of hatred and said, "Well then, you won't help me? I'll take it whether you like it or not." The man walked into the yard, grabbed a gas canister and started to leave. My father, concerned about what might happen, went after him, grabbed another canister and told him to leave. The man turned to him, his tone menacing, and said, "You'll lose everything. Watch your back." Those words stuck in my father's mind, but he didn't give them much thought at the time and went back to his work. As the hours passed, those words started to gnaw at him. My father, feeling uneasy, decided to call the employees to keep watch at the depot. There was a room in the back where he kept his tools, and he thought it would be best to stay alert in case the man came back. So they all hid, and once the depot was locked up, they settled in the back, watching everything until 11 p.m. With the whole town quiet, one of the employees, Alex, suggested it was time to leave, since he thought the man wouldn't return. "This wall is high, the gate is reinforced, there's no way he can get in here," Alex said. But before anyone could respond, they heard the dogs barking. It sounded like they were chasing something. Then the silence was shattered by a loud crash, something slamming into the gate. The noise sounded like a car crashing. My father, feeling the blood freeze in his veins, turned to the employees and said, "It's him. That man must have brought more people to break down the gate and steal the canisters." Fear hung thick in the air. They all knew the situation was about to escalate. Right after the crash, my father ran to the little house where my dog was kept and untied her chain. The moment she was freed, she shot off toward the gate with the speed of an arrow. I stayed outside watching from a distance, unsure of what to expect, when in the blink of an eye, everything fell into an eerie, absolute silence. The dog, sniffing the air, lay down beneath the gate as if something was waiting there, ready to reveal itself. That's when my father nudged me and told everyone to look over the wall. When we did, what we saw was like something straight out of a nightmare. It was a massive head, dark as the night, with enormous ears resembling a dog, but nothing remotely natural. Its eyes, enormous, glowed in the darkness as if they were alive, watching everything with a silent fury. My dog, realizing the creature's presence, began barking with all her might, but the sound was in vain. That thing, with an unsettling calm, entered the yard. Fear spread instantly, and I felt completely defenseless, as if there was nothing we could do to stop what was about to unfold. The creature was monstrous, easily over 2 meters tall. Its arms were broad and strong, and its fingers looked deformed, something so bizarre that even now, just recalling it, I get chills. The dog courageously lunged at the creature, but she was immediately captured. Even then, she didn't give up and tried to continue attacking, until, exhausted, she lay in the corner of the yard, growling but too weak to fight. The beast then stood up on its hind legs, and it was as if it could smell us. The sensation was indescribable, as if we knew without a doubt what that creature was. We had heard stories of a beast that roamed the region, but we never imagined we would come face to face with something so terrifying. The creature, slowly but with malicious certainty, began walking on all fours, circling the depot. It stopped in the middle, staring directly at us, as if it knew we were there and wanted us to know that it knew. Terror gripped us, but there was no escape. My father, with a desperate calm, grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun he had brought along. Without hesitation, he fired. The impact was direct. The creature fell to the ground, writhing in pain, but it didn't die immediately. It got back up, staggering, and with one last effort, leaped and ran toward the woods. It disappeared into the darkness before we had time to react. We ran to where it had vanished, but all we found was the silence of the night. The monster was gone. Since that night, we've never seen the man or the creature again. We kept watch for a few more nights, but nothing happened. Life returned to normal, but the fear of that thing, that beast, never left us. To this day, I remember that creature coming toward us, as if it was there to destroy us. Fortunately, my dog's bravery and my father's gun saved all of us. Three years ago, my son and I arrived in Rio de Janeiro, in the Tijuca neighborhood. I'm from Minas Gerais, and things back home were not looking good. I needed to find a way to support my family, so I decided to take a risk and come to Rio in search of work. My son, who was working as a mason's assistant at the time, and I, with nothing but our tools and the courage that remained, decided to try our luck. A mason's salary in Rio was more than double what I was making in Minas, and though I missed my family terribly, the need to work was a stronger feeling than any longing. We stayed in the city for 20 days, and soon we realized that the construction job wasn't exactly what we had expected. The location where we were working was hard to access, with overgrown vegetation taking over the top of the hill. The air smelled bad, something strange, like it was soaked in something rotten. Even so, there was a good amount of money waiting for us, and we were determined to get started. But when we approached the area, we were warned. That land belonged to someone else, and we were forbidden from crossing the fence. Even with everything ready to begin, we had no choice but to follow the orders. Our place was there at the work site, not in the surrounding area. Our lunch was delivered by a man named Byra, who always came bringing supplies and hanging around as some sort of watchdog. It was Byra himself who warned us about the area. He spoke in a low voice, telling us that the overgrown land hid car scrapyards and that most likely bodies of people involved with drug trafficking were burned there in that very spot. The story gave me chills, but I tried to dismiss it. It was just a legend, I thought. That night, I prayed for the month to pass quickly, but the days seemed to drag on. The weather felt strange, and everything seemed to take longer than usual. That night, as always, we slept in a simple room next to the work site. The sound of the wind and the noise of the city were constant, but nothing could prepare me for what was about to come. Some nights, my son would go out to get cigarettes, a habit I thought was harmless. But that night something felt different, as if the air was heavier, as if something was about to happen. I decided that the next time I would be the one to go out for the cigarettes, but I never imagined what that could mean. That night something was wrong. I had just finished my shower when I realized my son still hadn't returned, even after more than 2 hours. The unease grew inside me and soon fear settled in. I grabbed a knife, not exactly sure why, but it felt like I needed to be prepared for anything. I decided to go after him. I had heard stories about Rio de Janeiro, and I knew the city could be dangerous, but he was my son and I would do anything to bring him back. I walked down the street trying to stay calm, my eyes scanning every corner, but I couldn't find any trace of him. I passed by bars, bakeries, and more streets until despair started to take over. I pulled out my phone and tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. That's when the decision came. I'm not proud of it, but I have to tell you, because it was what led me into the woods that night. I just wanted him to come back, but instead I found something I could never have imagined. As I passed by the construction site, I noticed a faint light and a lit cigarette. It struck me as odd, but the light vanished into the woods. My heart raced, and then I heard my son's voice shout, "Dad, are you looking for me?" When I turned around, the smell of the cigarette hit me like a punch. I tried to say something, maybe scold him for how little money we had, how we could barely afford to eat, but then we heard a noise coming from the underbrush. I tried to light the path with my phone, but the light was weak, barely enough to see. Without wasting a second, my son lit a lighter and moved toward the woods. I ran after him, feeling a gut-churning suspicion that a thug might be hiding there. And that's when we saw it. It was a creature, a beast larger than my son. It was there, blended into the foliage with an appearance that I can barely describe. It was monstrous, and the sound it made, a low, guttural groan, stopped us dead in our tracks. We stood frozen for a moment. The fear was so intense that we didn't know what to do. The beast seemed oblivious to our presence, but soon we heard it moving toward us. It didn't attack, but the terror overtook me, and without thinking, I yanked my son away to put distance between us. We backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. Just when we thought we were in the clear, the creature bolted into the thick forest. There was no way to explain what was happening. The rest of the story is something I'll never forget. We went to the police station, where the officers tried to make sense of what had happened. They took us to the site where they found a body. They told us we couldn't leave the city until the investigation was complete. We spent the entire night explaining what we had seen over and over. The next day, after our boss confirmed our story, we were released, but with a warning. We were not to speak of werewolves as if it were some ridiculous thing. They didn't want us spreading panic. We returned home, but the feeling that something dark was being hidden stayed with me. My son fortunately quit smoking, and soon after he got into college in Rio de Janeiro. He chose to stay there, closer to home. To this day, I carry that fear with me, and the certainty that what we saw that night was far from normal.
Did you like the video? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any chilling stories. If you like mystery and supernatural stories, Chronicles of Fear is the right place for you. Leave your comment and share it with friends who also love a good dose of fear. Until next time. And stay tuned. What you see may not be what it really is.